amongst you have seen the movie Gandhi with Ben Kingsley in it? Oh, quite a few. My presentation shares a little of the movie Gandhi, and apart from the main character losing his hair, his eyesight and his teeth falling out, I've got the beginning of my talk at the end. So we've got a question up there: can the feminine save the planet? And I guess there's two answers, yes and no. The feminine can't do it alone, so very much no. But the feminine, if perfectly balanced with the masculine, has got a great chance. So I just wanted to talk a little about some of the concepts of the masculine and the feminine, because they've become a little bit convoluted, unfortunately, in more recent times. And the thing about concepts is that they're really good for illumination, but when they become fixed, they become stagnant. So please, this is just a concept for the purposes of this afternoon's talk. And I know there's a lot of controversy about the terminology of the masculine and the feminine, and I know that the human brain, the human system, is much more complex than just the masculine and the feminine. There's the anima and the animus and the collective unconscious and the shadow and all of these other things. But just for the purposes of illustrating a couple of points, let's just stay with the masculine and the feminine for the next 20 minutes. So the feminine's been around, the concept of the feminine's been around for a very long time. We can see the slide up there. The Venus of Willendorf was a little carving that they found 24,000 to 22,000 years ago. So, and it's a beautiful image of the feminine, and it's been used symbolically quite a bit in women's circles. But we also have the archetype of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It's a few thousand years old. And of course, many of us have seen those images of Leonardo da Vinci superimposed over the Mona Lisa. And there's a bit of a controversy about that as well, but I think you get the point that I'm making here. So within each of us, there's these two complementary forces, energies, the masculine and the feminine. And it doesn't necessarily refer to the male and the female. They're placeholder terms, and they describe a particular polarity. So the thing about the masculine and the feminine, as I said, they've become a little bit misconstrued in recent times, and now sort of refer to male and female, which is not really what they're intended for. And so they've lost a bit of their meaning, and even they're used in popular culture to promote polarisation, stereotyping, gender wars, and even a form of oppression. So let's just recognise that that's there and soldier on anyway. So the principle of gender, the first real talking about it was published in a document called the Kybalion in 1921, and it states that gender is in everything, and that gender exists in all planes, the physical, the mental and the spiritual. I think we all understand what physical gender is, although people like, there are some blurring of those boundaries these days as well, but when it gets to mental gender, the lines are really starting to blur, and spiritual gender, it's really complicated stuff. So I'm not going to talk about physical gender because I think that's pretty obvious. that diagram up there sort of makes a bit of a light-hearted look at that. So mental gender, you have the conscious mind, which is the seat of the will and awareness, and the subconscious is a deeper pool, a pool of significance, greater significance. And so when the subconscious and the conscious are in perfect sync, you have a perfect total mind functioning, according to several definitions that I looked at. And when you have that conjunction of the masculine and the feminine going on in your mind, that's when you can be at your best in terms of creativity and productivity. And they're the principal attributes of the two forces that I'm talking about. There's some interesting statistics around gender health issues. And for example, men are 2 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. These are some statistics I got that are global statistics, and they may not be relevant here, but it makes the point, I think. Men are also 4 times more likely to be diagnosed as young men with autism, 4 times the rate of suicide of women, and 1 in 5 men are likely to develop alcohol and drug dependency in their life. Comparing women, women are 3 times more likely to experience anorexia or bulimia. they're 2 times more likely to have post-traumatic stress disorder, they're 2 times more likely to experience depression, and only 1 in 12 women are likely to get into alcohol and drug dependency. So there's some serious gender biases there, if you like, in some health outcomes that aren't necessarily the physical health. Spiritual gender, this is another really sticky topic. And I've also had the great honour of working with a female elder, one of the Perth Circle of Elders, Auntie Violet Newman, and she's helped me see things that I never thought it was possible for a white man to see. And it's, as I said, it's transformed my life and showed me what intuition is and what this felt sense is. So there's women's law, L-O-R-E, and men's law, L-A-W. So they had a deep understanding of gender issues around spirituality, if you like. And neither was dominant. Both were equally important, but not equal. Hindu gurus, there was masculine male gurus, female gurus back in time. I think some of our reformist churches are starting to do some really good things now with gender equality, etc., etc. So there's a whole complex story around gender and the church and gender and spirituality, and I don't particularly want to dwell on that just in the moment. So what are the attributes of a healthy masculine? I think we all know those intuitively. We probably think of a footy hero or something like that. So it's confident, outgoing, expressive, imaginative, problem-solving, strength, bravery, determination, and action-oriented. Key word, I'm going to come back to it, actions have consequences. I'm sure you know, many of you know where I'm going with that story. Feminine, healthy feminine attributes, what do they look like? Soulful, receptive, trusting, patient, accepting, complex, intuitive, self-sacrificing, gentle, empathetic and sensitive. That resonates with me some of the time. Okay, what are the attributes of an unhealthy masculine or masculine out of balance? And this is where I'm going with this story, because as you can see up there, I want to talk a little about how gender issues have influenced our institutions and the way things are happening on the planet at the moment. So the out of balance masculine has poor levels of restraint, a lack of reason, it can descend into chaos, force, arrogance, aggression, violence, impatience, social alienation, risk-taking, particularly in youth, young men. And this is the interesting bit. There's a disconnect from nature, and there's a scepticism, a dishonouring of Indigenous wisdom. We've heard already today a little about biophilia and Richard Louv, Last Child in the Wilderness, and the importance of us as humans to actually be in intimate contact with nature. In fact, we are nature. The out of balance feminine, there's some interesting attributes there. Indecision, refusal of self-responsibility, helplessness, passivity, inferiority, fear of life, fear of a self-determined enslavement. And this is an interesting one, displaced authority. A lot of women, at times, listen very much to what opera said, or what their therapist said, or what the hairstylist said, or what J-Lo said. So how do these things, how can we look at some of these issues and look at our institutions that we hold dear, and some of those structural institutions of bureaucracies, how do they play out? And is there a solution to this? Well, clearly there is, and the solution is a gentle balancing and integrating of these two energies in the self, in your relationship with your significant other, and more broadly with family members and in the workplace. And as you start to see how the out of balance gender issues might be playing out in yourself, you start to take very subtle stock of that, and some changes can occur that are quite profound, and they have a ripple out effect. So, as I mentioned earlier, that well-balanced masculine and feminine is optimal for total mind function. And humans are at their very best when they're left-right brain connected, when their masculine and feminine are both engaged appropriately. So for the individual, the Dalai Lama has told us that the inner is a reflection of the outer, of one's outer. So the inner work, it's really important to do the inner work. Meditation, inner dialogue, sitting quietly, connecting to the body, heartfulness, And that certainly was something that I've only come to very recently, and the times that I've spent on country with Noel has shown me very deeply that even Aboriginal men have a very deep connection to their own feminine. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the Dalai Lama recommended that we laugh and live authentically, and you can see that these things are actually directed very much at some of those feminine attributes. To be creative and paint, write, sing, dance, etc., etc. And my dad's a very creative man, a musician, and my mum's an artist, so I'm very lucky that I have got skills in both of those areas as well as being a scientist. And Dad shared with me a book that was called Mozart and the Fighter Pilot, and it basically shows that someone that practices music regularly keeps their cognitive function for much longer into their old age. That's just one example of how being creative can, and exercising that feminine part of oneself can lead to better outcomes. Be vulnerable with another you might care about. That might be a little hard for us fellas, but I've been practicing it with mixed success. Meditation and inner dialogue, that's really an important one. It gives you the resilience to bounce through the day and resist some of those moments when an out-of-control masculine agency might be giving you a hard time. Institutional flourishing, command and control, we've got to change it to polycentric networks, that is horizontal corporations, heterarchies rather than hierarchies. Devolved decision-making, participatory dialogue, inclusiveness, engaged partners, flexibility, transparency and accountability. They're all the attributes of institutions that have embedded the feminine a little more into the way they do business. And there's several notable examples out there, Olivetti Corporation, etc., and you can Google the horizontal corporation and have a look at that. Economic flourishing, the current model is based very much on scarcity, which creates an excuse for a disproportionate distribution of wealth. And the opposite to that is an abundance mentality, very much more feminine. From linear, leaky, truncated systems that don't have dotted lines going off the page of the economic model saying, oh, they're the life support systems, but we won't include those in the economic models. Hello? That's why we've gotten to the trouble that we've got into, is that we don't wrap the consequences of our actions properly into the economic models. They're infantile. Abundance, empowerment based upon trust and equitability, and cultivates a higher consciousness, love, cooperation and compassion, rather than the opposite, which is the scarcity mentality. Again, you can Google that and have a look. There's some really interesting insights there. A flourishing media, that's another area that we've really got some problems. And once we get away from a concentrated media ownership where the media doesn't report on complex issues, it doesn't report on issues that require a longer or more complex telling, it stays with very simple headline grabs. There are ways that can be improved. Broad-based networked content, dense, compressible, interactive and immersive content where people can actually self-direct themselves, and clearly the digital world's very good for that. Participant community that can provide contributions and provide editorial services, and this is certainly happening in some parts of the world. And reflexive, interactive feedback of users so that the improvement process is actually driven by the community, the client community. So what we're really aiming for is a divine communion, I guess, rather than this constant gender wars. And I guess that right-hand image spoke to me of serious planetary ills, and the one on the left speaks to me of a divine dance. So I apologise for the little bit of simplicity in just talking about the masculine and the feminine when the human system is much more complex than that. But for me, I found that there were some real insights there, and it helps me understand a little of myself and has helped me grow. And so I thank you all very much.